number of pupils absent from school in England because of COVID has risen 60% in the past 2 weeks, according to the official figures. But masks in classrooms have not been made compulsory.
The Welsh Government's now followed Scotland and Northern Ireland's requirements for masks to be worn in secondary school classrooms. But in England, face coverings are only advised in communal areas. So, should England follow suit and make mask wearing a requirement in classrooms as well as corridors? We're now joined by Professor Melinda Mills from Oxford University, who thinks it would make sense and be less confusing, and writer Molly Kingsley, co-founder of the campaign group Us For Them, who worries that wearing masks is having a long-term damaging effect on our children.
Well, that's an interesting point, Molly Kingsley, because, of course, the purpose of masks is to have a long-term effect on our good health. Why do you think masks in classrooms would be a bad idea for kids?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think we need to be really honest about whose good health we are protecting with masks. You know, we know it is a blessing of COVID that thankfully it does not seriously impact the vast majority of children. And at this point in the pandemic, we can't claim that, you know, to say that children haven't been harmed by our pandemic measures. You know, the impacts of the measures that we have rolled out on children are staring us in the face. So, you know, we have a mental health tsunami that's impacting 1 in 6 children. We know that 5 million children are at risk of not being able to speak at an age-appropriate level. We have eating disorders soaring. We have 1 billion school days lost. And we know that masks, particularly masks in classrooms, are a really significant intervention for children. And at this point in the pandemic, you know, we should take the blessing that most children are not seriously impacted by COVID and let them live freely and unimpeded.
Professor Melinda Mills, you sit on the behavioural subgroup of SAGE. You are speaking, though, this morning in a personal capacity. Do you take on board, as a professor of sociology, those concerns when it comes to children and putting them under more restrictions? Because we're suggesting that children wear masks indoors, whereas apart from shops and public transport, we're not saying that about adults.
Right.
Yeah, so I think the messaging has been quite confused for adults and children as well. And I think it's really important to emphasize, so I'm speaking on behalf of scientific evidence as well. So if we look at the evidence, and it's really very clear, there's no evidence that shows that face masks, wearing face coverings, cause harm in children. Actually, it's exactly the opposite. That there's been several studies in the U.S., for example, over 1,000 schools in Arizona, and what they found is that the schools where they didn't wear masks, they had a 3 times higher infection rate. There's other studies that have also showed masks combined with ventilation also, significantly lower the infection rate in schools. So it's really, your previous speaker was talking about, children and that it harms them. There's no evidence. And in fact, it's to the contrary. And it's talking about if children are infected, then they're going to infect their parents. We've already seen that when we look at the age-specific infection rates. They're going to infect their grandparents. So it's not just about an individual child as well. It's about spreading the infection.
Right. Professor Mills, there'll be lots of people screaming into their television screens, not least because I respect your academic qualifications in sociology, but you are not an expert in epidemiology or psychology. And one of the complaints here is this will do enduring emotional violence to young people. You say or claim, my language, not yours, that these young children are vectors of transmission. But, of course, most of their parents in this country and their grandparents will be double jabbed and then hopefully boosted. So what's the point of it?
Yeah, so it's interesting how you try to discount my qualifications. I wrote a very detailed report about face coverings for the Royal Society. I've published many things in this area. So you could just look at the qualifications. That's no problem. And what I'm actually talking about is evidence that's produced by others, because that's what we do as scientists. We look at all of the evidence and we lay it all out together. And then and that's what I'm talking to you about right now. And you can you can look it up. So I think that's really important. And I think it's, you know, a key aspect here is if you have children that, you know, these are the highest infection rates, we've seen that. And we know that wearing masks, you know, wearing them in the classroom where you're in an enclosed space is just as important, if not more, than in the corridor. So that's really, really important to emphasize as well, too. And that's just, the discussion is just as confused when we're talking about adults wearing them in restaurants and pubs. So I think that's really important. And, you know, I'm talking about evidence that was produced for the government by the Environmental Modeling Group in September, and, you know, and throughout the world about the effectiveness of masks. So you don't have to bring it back to me. You just have to look at the evidence. And it's really clear. And we want to, you know, I think the whole point about this is it's not some sort of political or, you know, idea that we want masks. What we want to do is we want to avoid a lockdown. You know, we want to stop the infections and spread to children and to other people.
Okay.
I think that's the most important thing.
Well, Molly Kingsley, I mean, the most detrimental thing to children, I think parents might consider right now, is that we do face another situation where schools are closed. Children have to learn at home. We know that there aren't the resources or parental support for huge numbers of children to be able to do that. Even with the best will in the world, parents can't offer the same home learning to children as they can get in the classroom. And of course, we do not want to see another situation where the BTECs, the A-levels and the GCSEs and all the other qualifications are put on hold again or damaged by an alternative system. So aren't masks a small price to pay to avoid all of that?
I mean, look, I absolutely agree. We want to avoid school closures. They were an unmitigated disaster for children. But the equation here isn't, you know, children in school with masks or no school. The equation is children in school with masks or children in school without masks. And I think this point about evidence is really, really important because, you know, I hear what the professor says. I think on the other side, we are now sitting on a mountain of evidence about actually the harms masks cause children. And I'm not talking about transmission here. I'm talking about other impacts. And I think, you know, you put it really well yourself, actually, Rob, when you talked about, you know, emotional violence. And we've just heard your wonderful campaign, the 1 million minutes campaign, about the importance of friendship and interaction. Let me just read you a few emails from children that we've received about masks this week. So, masks are turning school into a horrible, smothering, scary place no one wants to be. This is from a child. It's the fact everyone is so silent. It's the way everyone is so depressed and anxious. It's the feeling of constant loneliness because no one talks. We got a poem from a 14-year-old. And now I wear a mask so I cannot be seen. You cannot hear my quiet voice. You cannot hear me scream. Control me now when I am scared and shut me in all day. Take away what made me me. It's a heavy price I pay. And I just think this idea that these are risk-free, downside-free measures for children, they're manifestly not. And in fact, talking of evidence and experts, so, you know, let's listen to what our own experts have to say on this. We have Professor Van Tam, Deputy CMO, just a few weeks ago. I think it's difficult for children in schools with face masks. Russell Viner, until recently president of the Royal College of Paediatrics.
Molly, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. And I understand, and as a parent, my heart goes out to those children. But what we do not want is for those children to then end up at home trying to, you know, do their education because we've had spread around the classroom. Look, you both got really...
I'm sorry to interrupt. What age does it start? I mean, there comes a time we have to live with this virus. I hear the professor. I care about the science.
Yeah.
I'm deeply concerned about this. You know, I'm not a parent. I'm a godparent. Do we put 2-year-olds in masks in kindergartens? 3, 4? When does this start?
Well, we've already said that we want those children to be wearing masks in communal areas. There is an argument, well, what's the point of them even having them in communal areas if they're not going to have them in the classroom? There is no doubt that this is an incredibly sensitive, difficult area to make policy, and to treat children differently to adults also seems very odd. Why aren't we wearing masks if we're going to insist that children in classrooms wear masks? But thank you both so much for your time this morning. We really appreciate it.